Good morning to our online gang. If you're visiting from the city or across the country, I want to say welcome to you this morning. If we haven't met, I'm Chuck. It's a privilege to be here this morning. Sean needed a little rest, so he called the bullpen. So I'm here. I'm a good lefty that comes out of the bullpen. All right, well, this morning we're going to look at Luke chapter 8. As I was reading through my devotions in the morning, I'm moving through the Gospels right now, and I came across Luke, and these two individuals, Jairus and his daughter, and the woman with the issue of blood, are tied together very uniquely and very intimately. And I would say, as a writer on Luke's behalf, I would say very cleverly as well. There's a lot of comparisons and contrasts here. And so I've titled the message this morning, Power Couple. Now, aren't I clever? Is that so good or what? You're just amazed at my wit this morning, aren't you? Okay, all right. Yeah, I thank you for overwhelming me with your support. Yeah. Okay, so basically the key thought really for me in looking at this is that Jesus displays in the Gospels, particularly in this section of the Gospel of Luke, man, there are so many miracles, which we'll very quickly go over in just a second. But Jesus displays decisive power over all of his creation, and his power to heal and to save is open to all. Now, before we get into this, just a point of theology is, all right, as I'm reading this week, and as I read it through my devotions, I'm looking at two people with great faith. They're desperate, and they have great faith, and on both occasions, their faith is rewarded, if you will, by Jairus' daughter is raised from the dead, and the woman with the issue of blood is completely healed. And so I'm looking at this, and not the skeptic in me, but the critical thinker in me looks at this and says, well, great, they had faith and they were saved. Doesn't that mean it shouldn't happen for everybody? And the answer to that is, it's all in God's timing. I can't say yes or no, but it's in God's timing. So let me give you two pieces here. Firstly, as we look at these miracles this morning, in a biblical context, in the setting at the time, in Jerusalem or around Jerusalem, Galilee during this time, these gospel miracles clearly demonstrate the messianic claims of Jesus. There's a purpose to these miracles, and to have them so compact and so just intense over this time. The goal, in one respect, is to show that Jesus is actually the Messiah. He is God. He's showing his contemporary audience that. But in a theological context, or what does that mean for me today? God's miracles still happen today. I can see two of them in the room this morning. I know for there's the other one. I know for a fact that God's miracles still happen today, and they demonstrate his sovereign power, and they're not a result of whether we have enough faith. For example, I put 2 Corinthians here as an address. The Apostle Paul, of all people, you would think the dude had faith, right? Faith that would be like Shohei Ohtani faith that's up there in the stratosphere. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right? Dodgers. Oh. Yeah, okay. I didn't have the faith to keep those 3 home runs from leaving the yard, you know what I mean? But Paul, definitely, you'd think he had the faith, but in Corinthians he writes and he says, you know what, I had an eye problem, most scholars would say, and I prayed 3 times that I'd be healed, and God, it wasn't in his sovereign plan for me to be healed. And so it's not about our faith. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, Hebrews tells us. And Hebrews also tells us without faith it's impossible to please him. But it's not like a vending machine where I have enough money, I have enough faith that I plug it into the machine and I just pull the lever and I get what I want. There's something about trusting God in his omnipotence and his omniscience and his omnipresence. He's so much bigger than us and his ways are so much higher than ours. So in essence, God's care for our needs is intimate, definitely, but his ways are often greater than our plans. And so just a little caveat as we move into this, because that was my thought. I'm like you, I'm walking through some situations in family life and in friends' lives where they're on the knife edge of life and death. And we're praying and we're trusting, but in the end, it all comes down to God's sovereignty. And I know nothing gets into our lives without first being filtered through God's love. Okay, so let's dive into the text here. Let's read it from 40 to 56. All right, Jesus returns. The crowd welcomes him, for they were all waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue. So he's kind of one of the bosses. And falling at Jesus' feet, so the boss falls at this itinerant evangelist's feet, go figure. He falls at his feet. He implored him to come to his house. I got a little typo there. I think instead of or, it should be for. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. So Jesus goes with them, and the people pressed around him. It's almost like the ambulance is on its way to the house, and the lights are blaring, and they're going as fast as they can. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and though she'd spent all of her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. Probably a uterine hemorrhage. That's what many Bible scholars figure, but they can't be absolutely sure. And Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowd surround you and they're pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "No, somebody touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." When the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." So we have Jairus' daughter. Now we have a daughter of the king. While he was still speaking, someone from the ruler's house came and said, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." So imagine Jairus in this situation. The ambulance is on the way to the house with a lot of immediacy, and then all of a sudden the ambulance stops and makes a right turn and goes somewhere else. If you were Jairus, how would you feel? And then on top of that, it's too late now. His daughter is dead. But Jesus, on hearing this, answered him, "Do not fear, only believe, and she will be well." And when he came to the house, he allowed no one to enter with him except Peter and John and James and the father and mother of the child. And all were weeping and mourning for her. But he said, "Do not weep, for she's not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. They laughed at Jesus, knowing that she was dead. They were dead certain, and, to their credit, they had a reason to believe that. But taking her by the hand, he called, saying, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned, and she got up at once. And he directed that something should be given her to eat. So much like Jesus post-resurrection, when he was asking for fish to validate the fact that he was resurrected bodily, he does the same thing here to authenticate the fact that she is back to life. She's not a ghost or a spirit. And her parents were amazed, but he charged them to tell no one what happened. All right, well, let's take a look at this and break it down. We'll look at the big picture, and then we'll go through the verses. So as I mentioned, the nature and the replication of multiple miracles take place here in the Gospel of Luke and in the other three Gospels for that matter as well. So previously in Luke, coming up to chapter 8, we've got the many, including Peter's mother-in-law, who is healed in chapter 4, the lepers healed in chapter 5, the paralytic in chapter 5, the man with the withered hand, chapter 6. Again, the many, Luke references in chapter 6, the centurion servant in chapter 7, the widow's son in chapter 7. And as we move into chapter 8, in the verses prior to verse 40, where we started this morning, he exhibits power over nature, where he stills the storm. He exerts power over demons, where he heals the demoniac. And then, as we see this morning, he has power over disease, the woman with the issue of blood. And then he has power over death with Jairus' daughter. Now, the miracles of Jairus and the woman with the issue of blood both had impossible, desperate situations. Here you have a frantic father and an outcast woman. Varied situations. On the one hand, Jairus' family is dealing with potential and certain death, or actual death. The woman with the issue of blood is 12 years of disease that makes her a complete outcast. And so we have a ruler and we have a nobody. There's a different expression of their faith. Jairus is public. He does not stand on ceremony. Though he's a ruler of a synagogue, he runs in and falls at this guy's feet because he is desperate. And yet the woman with the issue of blood is a little more different for different reasons. She's an outcast. She can't come into company like that. And so she just kind of very, very clandestinely comes up behind Jesus and just thinks, I'll grab his garment, maybe something will happen, and I'll be out of here before anybody even sees me. And then there's a similar expression of their faith. Both of them, to their credit, were steadfastly and reverently seeking Jesus. They just believed against all odds, against all circumstances. And you think, man, if in both occasions the deck is completely stacked against both of them. One has gone to as many doctors as possible and can't find any relief. My first thought was, well, call Robert Kennedy Jr. He'll get it answered for you. Just kidding. And on the other hand, you have Jairus, and he's lost. He's watching his daughter's life slip away from her before his eyes. How would you feel, those of you who are parents? My goodness, I can't imagine anything worse than seeing your child suffer to that extent. And so you've got two really, really desperate people here who are coming from both sides of the street. And there's Jesus in the middle, ready to touch and to save whosoever will may come. Now, Jesus, on the other hand, he appeals to the faith of both. He says to Jairus, hey, wait a minute, the ambulance took a right turn. It's going away from your house right now. Believe despite the setback or what you think or feel. And to the woman, he says, believe despite what you think of yourself, what others think of yourself, and what you may think others think about you. Because I'm sure there's a lot of head games going on with her because nobody wants her around. Nobody wants her around, including her family. And she's been a desperado. She's been an outcast for 12 years. Think back to 2013. That's 12 years ago. Let me double check. Is my math good? Sometimes it's a little suspect. Okay, I did the math right? Yeah. 2013, imagine that. You lose your job, you lose your health, you lose your family, you lose your community. And you know what? Go out to Cleveland National Forest. That's the only place that we will let you stay. That's it. Oh, and along with that, you've got this issue of blood that is really the metronome in your life. That's the thing that is the constant. So imagine how this woman felt. So there's a lot of desperation, there's a lot of heartache, and there's a lot of real live pain here, and it's coming from two different directions. And so Jesus appeals to the faith of both. He publicly, as I mentioned, and as the Gospels really record, he publicly displays his messianic power in these two miracles and in the other ones. He's very caring. To Jesus, he's very resolute, and he's very reassuring, despite the fact that the ambulance is going the other way. And with the woman, he calls her daughter. When was the last time anybody called her that? When was the last time anybody actually spoke to her, other than to say, get out of here? So here, very, very tender. Jesus he's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He's the supreme sovereign, but he's the shepherd and overseer of our souls. And he cares so deeply and so intimately and so passionately for all of us. And then lastly, he's unconventional. The woman and the daughter are both unclean, according to Mosaic law. And then along with that, you see here that he says, tell no one. And it's a little unconventional because with the healing of the demoniac, he goes to this healed person and he says, go back to your hometown, tell everybody what happened. I want you to tell everybody. But here, in a bit unconventional manner, he just says, no, don't tell anybody. And there's some possible reasons for that make practical sense, which we'll get to. Okay, so let's look at the first two verses. Now, when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue. And he falls at Jesus' feet. He implores him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12, and she was dying. And Jesus went, and the people pressed around him. So there's a real serious crowd going on here. The pressing is, the language in the Greek is like the crushing of grapes. And so it's pretty intense. So here, Jairus pushes past convention, desperately and humbly seeking Jesus. On the one hand, Jairus could have said, I'm the ruler, he can come to me. I know I have a serious problem, but I snap my fingers and people come to me, especially this guy who has no title, he has no letters, his only reputation is controversy right now. He has only one tunic, he's itinerant. So, no, I'm not going to him, he can come to me. And then secondly, this ruler, on top of that, to make it even more humbling, he comes to Jesus and he falls down at his feet. And I'm sure everybody in that crowd looked at that and said, whoa. I don't know what whoa in Hebrew is, but it was, whoa, this is pretty serious. And then along with that, Jesus' reputation up to this point, as he moves forward, he is gaining more and more controversy with the crowds and with the religious leaders. And so, this is one of those things where, the danger today is you pick a political position and then somebody loves you, but then somebody really hates you. And in this situation, it's becoming very binary. Either you're for him or you are very vehemently against him. And yet this ruler, you know what? He's pushing past all convention, all headlines, all appearances, all assumptions, and boom, he's down at Jesus' feet. That's a lesson for all of us, huh? Let's not be limited by all of the convention of our culture or our own weakness, our own insecurities. Let's take God at his word and ask, seek, and knock when we have needs. And then the crowd pushes against Jesus. And as I mentioned, the language here is, holy cow, this is like grapes being crushed. And so I asked Greta this morning when we were going over this, and I said, think back, what was, and I'll ask you this, what was the place in your life, what's been the place in your life where you have been the most pressed in a crowd? Now, I thought about, for you San Diegans, I thought, well, it had to be a trolley on the way to or from a Padre game. And I thought, no way, nobody goes to those games, so never mind. Just kidding. Because I think of Subway in Manhattan going to a Yankee game, going up to the Bronx. It's holy cow, this is tight. The other one I think about is I saw the Rolling Stones in my BC days before I met the Lord. I saw them in the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, Texas, 1981. And me and my buddy John Sikorsky, our job was to get to the front. Any show we went to, we wanted to get to the front. And we got about 20 yards from the stage, and we looked at each other and we said, I don't think I want to go any further. It's not very safe up there. So we stayed at a healthy distance. And then I saw the Clash a year later in this little club in Texas, and I thought, I was down in front before I knew it hit me, and there was no getting out of that. But I always remember, man, I knew what you had for lunch if you were standing next to me because I could smell your breath. But this is how tight it is. They are really pressing in. And the irony here is they're pressing in, but really the one who has the faith to touch, who has intention and has a goal is the woman with the issue of blood. She actually reaches out and touches him. So the crowd's pushing against Jesus. Let's keep on. There's a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And though she spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. Hallelujah. Imagine how she must have felt. 12 years in the snap of a finger, complete deliverance. And she knew immediately. She was that intimately involved with her body and with the challenges her body were experiencing that when it was over, man, she knew immediately. So the woman, like Jairus, the woman pushes past convention. She's not welcome in society, as the text tells us. Leviticus 15 says, if you have an issue of blood, you are unclean. If you touch anybody, they are unclean. And so there's a lot at stake here for her to come, not only in a crowd, but also to come up to this amazing rabbi and teacher and have the gall or the chutzpah, that's the Yiddish, the hitzpah, the chutzpah, the guts to touch his gown. And probably why she didn't touch him physically. She didn't want to make him unclean, but she's desperate. And so she's not welcome in society. She's not being helped by medicine. She's an outcast. She's cut off from her family, her friends, her culture. She's lost her health, her wealth, her standing in society. Oh, and by the way, she can't go to Shabbat Friday night at all. She can never enter into God's house. If there was a place where she could receive comfort, the door is barred and has been barred for 12 years. And then she's not afraid to touch his garment. Likely, this is one of the 4 tassels that are on the bottom of a garment, which signify God's commands, a reminder to keep God's commands. It comes out of Numbers chapter 15. So Jesus says, after being touched, well, who was it that touched me? When all denied it, Peter said, Master, the crowds surround you and they're pressing in on you. How could you even ask that question? But Jesus said, someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out of me. So firstly, Peter questions to shut down. He can't see what's going on, and he shouldn't. But in the same token, when Jesus asks a question like that, you would think that you'd say, all right, what's in this? The master's asking a question, and so let me go along with this and try and figure out where he's going. But instead, Peter just looks at the natural and says, too many people, how on earth could you ask this kind of question? But there's so much more going on, isn't there? So Jesus, as a contrast to that, Jesus questions in order to draw out. He's attempting to really send a profound message here and to affirm a woman who has been an outcast for 12 years. So Jesus knows, obviously Jesus knew that this woman was going to touch his garment even before she knew. He is God, he's omniscient, he knows everything. So it's not as if he didn't know and he's starting to do a little opinion poll here to find out what's up. He knows, and he's got a goal here. He knows, but he seeks to display to her and to the crowd that she was healed. In other words, she could now re-enter society because the issue of blood was not an issue anymore. And then why she was healed, and that would be her simple faith. Not the money that she lost to the doctors, not the fact that she snuck into temple and offered some prayers or some incense, just the very fact that she trusted that Jesus was able to do what he said he could do, and that would be to heal. And then she knew regarding this question, and Jesus waits to allow her to courageously declare the miracle and then to state her faith in him. So he wanted her to say that it was by his touch or by her touch actually, that she was made well. She needed to tell the crowd that, and perhaps even maybe she needed to tell herself that he was the source of her healing, not the touch, it was her. And so you've got two things going on here. One, the crowd looks and says, oh my gosh, we've seen something miraculous, and the ramifications for us are, let's let her back in society now. And then the other one is the woman where, oh my gosh, not only am I healed, that would be enough, but now I have the ability and the freedom now to come and find my sister and my brothers and hug them and have a meal with them and go to Shabbat with them on Friday night. So there's a lot going on here, and that's the reason why Jesus is doing what he's doing. He knew, but there were some lessons and some circumstances that needed to be addressed. In verse 47, when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. So the woman pushes past her own presumption. What are the people going to think about me? What if I make him unclean? He has to go away until sundown. I know nobody in this crowd is going to like that. What about either he or the crowd or both are going to punish me? So I bet there's a lot of games going on in her head, not only prior to touching his garment, but then recognizing that, hey, you know what, he's on to me. He knows what happened, and he's going to wait until I show myself, which she does. And she does that by displaying humility and transparency, just like Jairus. No games, no fooling around, no hypocrisy. Just she comes to him just as she is. And then Jesus, in turn, responds with tenderness. This woman is nobody's daughter for 12 years. She has no connection to anybody except for their scorn and their indifference. And as I mentioned, going back to 2013. And then Jesus responds with hope. He says, you're well, go in peace. And that word for you're well, in the Greek, it's sozo, and it means you are spiritually well and you are physically well. Go in peace. Man, what a transaction this is. This woman's world is completely changed overnight. This community's world is completely changed in the blink of an eye. Unbelievable. And this is how good God is and how caring God is and how God uses this story to communicate to them and to communicate to us that he's a rewarder of those that diligently seek him. It's not about our faith. It's about his love for us and his plan, his sovereign plan for our lives. In 49, while he was still speaking, someone from the ruler's house came and said, bad news. Your daughter is dead. Don't trouble the teacher anymore. Let's move into funeral arrangements now. But Jesus, on hearing this, answered him and said, do not fear, only believe, and she will be well. The opposite of faith is fear. Fear rests on the known and the natural. And as Anthony was mentioning, all of the circumstances that make us wackos, all the rational things. But then faith says, you know what? There is a God. God has manifested himself in many, many ways, through his word, through creation, through his son, through the presence of the Spirit in the life of the church. There's all kinds of different things. Through the law, you think about 10,000 or 4,000 years ago in Asia, it was wrong to kill somebody. And yesterday in Central America, it's wrong to kill somebody. I mean, innately, we know. It's almost as if the Ten Commandments are on our hearts as human beings, innately, because we're created in God's image. So there's all kinds of ways that God reveals himself. And here he says, if you just believe, don't be fearful. Don't lean on your own understanding. Trust in me with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Acknowledge me and I will make your paths straight. So Jairus gets the worst possible news. Gosh, if only he hadn't been delayed, this could have been avoided. Imagine how he felt. Imagine the thoughts that are running in his head about Jesus. Man, you said you would come. You said you help. Then all of a sudden you see this woman for whatever reason. You decide to turn your attention on her. All the while, I'm just desperate here. I'm chewing my fingernails off, and then my daughter dies because you're doing something else. You're a liar. Imagine what's going on in his head. But Jesus says, hey, don't look at the situation. Don't be afraid. Instead, have faith. Have faith in the fact that I have a plan. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. In verse 51, when he came to the house, he allowed no one to enter with him except Peter and John and James and the father and mother of the child, and all were weeping and mourning for her. But he said, "Do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. And so firstly, you have the attitude of the parents and of the three disciples. It's just simple obedience. I don't know whether any of them had seen a dead body before. Certainly mom and dad going back into the room where their daughter lay motionless. I'm sure once again, there's probably a lot of emotions going on here. For the boys, there are some religious parameters here that the reality of touching a dead body means uncleanness. And so I'm sure they're thinking a whole lot of things right now. So you have the attitude of the parents, and then you have the attitude of the mourners. If you're not familiar with Jewish culture, these mourners were hired. Now, obviously, because of the deep family relationships, I'm sure there were a number of friends and family that were deeply touched by this loss. But according to culture, they would also hire mourners, professional mourners who would come in and just be passionate about death, the moaning and the screaming and all the gesticulations of the hands and the body. And so here, these are the people who Jesus is confronting. They're just there because it's a job. And so they're acting culturally, and then they basically are scorning Jesus. They laughed at him, while Jairus and the woman with the issue of blood, they both were not laughing at Jesus. They were so desperate. They were pushing past their own rational limitations, and they were willing to trust him by faith. And then finally, Jesus says she's only sleeping. Now, this is a New Testament term for death. If you're familiar with the Gospels, in John 11:11, Jesus spoke about Lazarus, and he says, "Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him." So it could mean literal sleep in the New Testament, or it could mean a metaphor for death. And here, maybe Jesus is poking the mourners a little bit to get their attention, to say, you know what, she's not asleep. She's really dead, and I'm going to prove to you in about 30 seconds that she was dead, and now she's alive. And then finally in verses 54 through 56, taking her by the hand, he called, saying, "Child, arise." That's all it took. And her spirit returned, and she got up at once. And he directed that something should be given her to eat. So once again, that post-resurrection meal of fish that Jesus had, you see the same thing replicated here. And her parents were amazed, but he charged them to tell no one what happened. And perhaps the reason for that, well, firstly, Jesus pushes past convention, the uncleanness of touching a dead body. Well, you know what? It's not going to be a dead body for long, so you can forget about Leviticus or Numbers 19. Then Jesus points to eating, again, much like his post-resurrection eating in Luke 24. So in essence, this is saying there's no tricks here. She's not a Casper the Friendly Ghost. She's not an apparition. This little girl was dead, and now she is alive in the flesh. And I'll prove it to you one way, by she can take a meal. And then lastly, he says, tell no one. And again, that's the same thing as before. It's unconventional, but perhaps Jesus is saying this because my time has not yet come, as he has said on other occasions in the gospel. All this unbelievable press he's getting as he conducts his ministry, he just basically says, my time to go to Jerusalem and be a sacrifice for the sin of humanity, it's not yet. So firstly, let's slow that down. And then secondly, the people by and large wanted to make him a king, and a king that would overthrow the Roman government. And that's not the kind of king he is. He's the one that's going to overcome sin with his sacrificial death. And so these are the reasons perhaps why he tells them to tell no one. While on the other hand, he tells the demoniac, go tell everybody in maybe your Gentile community that I've done what I've done. So to come back to the key thought, Jesus displays decisive power over his creation. Jesus Christ is God. And he's proving it in the Gospels by having command over wind, sea, death, disease, you name it, demonic possession. He is in decisive control over his creation, and his power to heal and to save is open to all. Amen? All right, well, let's read our new catechism. I got an easy one this week. This is great. Let's do new catechism, and then I'll pray, and we'll receive communion together. All right, number 30. What is the Lord's Prayer? When I saw that, I thought, yeah, this is going to be easy. Okay, let's go all read it together. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Yay. Lord, thank you for your touch in our lives, your presence in our world. Thank you that you are creator and that you are redeemer. You own the title to our lives twice. You've created us, and also you have redeemed us. You've rescued us from the power of sin and the fear of death. And as we come to you simply by faith, we are asking, Lord, that your grace would continue to manifest itself more in our lives, but certainly also through our lives, as our culture and our world desperately need agents of grace. We need points of light that will share grace despite how we're treated. And so thank you again for these lessons this morning, Lord. You are God. You are the Messiah. We recognize that, and we humbly fall at your feet and say thank you for revealing your salvation to us. But just as importantly, thank you for becoming salvation for us. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever would believe on him would not perish, but have everlasting life. Amen. And as we